Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session, Advising for Federal Government Careers, What to Expect. Today is going to be part of the DC Virtual Trek Week. We'll give a few seconds for everyone to connect to audio and make sure that you're fully online. If you could put in the chat where you're joining from, we're a mishmash of a bunch of MPA, MPP, and public administration, public policy schools. So we'd love to know where everyone is coming from. All right, I see a Baruch College student. Woohoo. Okay. So we'll get started because we have a jam-packed agenda for today, and we really want you to get to meet today's speakers. So hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Bruno. I am the Assistant Director of Graduate Career Services at Baruch College at the Marxe School of Public and International Affairs. And I'll also let my co-host today introduce himself.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Baldassario. I am the Director of Engagement at the UConn School of Public Policy up in Hartford, Connecticut. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Yes. And today, as a part of the NASPAA DC Virtual Trek Week, we're excited to present today's panel. So today we're going to be sharing tips on how to navigate your job search in federal government, from the application to the offer. And we're starting with a panel of NASPAA students and alumni who have gone through the process. We also want to note that today's session is brought to you because of the work of Partnership for Public Service. It's a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization whose goal is to build a better government and a stronger democracy through recognizing public service. Some of their initiatives have been the Sammy Awards and getting employer engagement from federal agencies. So what it's like to work at different executive branch agencies. For colleges and universities, the partnership helps us, career advisors help you, job seekers, along with hosting fellowships and internships. They provide guides and resources to help job seekers navigate their way around federal hiring. So just a quick overview of agenda. So we did our little welcome. We're now going to go into the alumni and current student panel. Following that, we have a few tips from us career advisors to help you explore your applications and the resources available to you. And we will have it open for questions and answers, a Q&A session at the end of it all. During this time, we do ask that you please keep your microphones muted. If there's a question that you're kind of burning to us, put it in the chat. We'll make sure to get to it towards the end. There will be an opportunity for you to share, speak out loud, or we'll read it from the chat. So without further ado, here is an overview of our session panelists today. So we have Francesca Littman, Jeffrey Montoya, and Eric Smith. But I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen for a second so they can introduce themselves. So as we do it here, let's see. One second. Okay, so panelists, tell us who you are. What program or what program are you from, and which schools you're joining us from? Perhaps what year you've graduated and your current roles. And we'll get more into them a little bit later with the questions we have too. So Eric, can we have you start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Smith. I completed my Master's of Public Affairs at Brown University in 2020. It was quite the year. I'm currently a communications analyst in the Office of the Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Officer at the U.S. Agency for International Development.
Great, thank you. Francesca?
Hi, I'm Francesca Littman. I finished up my MPA back in 2019, and I'm currently an HR specialist at the National Institutes of Health.
And last but not least, Jeffrey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Montoya, and I am currently a MPA student, second-year graduate student at Baruch College. And I'm currently an intern at the Pan American Development Foundation doing, pride and support as a programs intern.
Well, thank you, panelists, for introducing yourselves. Now what we want to do is focus the majority of our content and the next phase of our conversation in hearing more about your experiences. So this question is going to be for all of our panelists, and we'll do the same order in which we did our introduction. So we'll go Eric, Francesca, Jeffrey, and then I will shuffle up that order throughout some later questions. But our first thing that we want to hit the ground running with, whether it was the position you're currently in or a previous role, perhaps in the federal context, think back to your first time applying for federal jobs. What was that process like? Where did you start? And for our student attendees today, what's most important for them to understand is how long did that process take? How many roles you're looking at? Just tell us a little bit about your experiences really diving into looking for federal opportunities. So again, we'll go Eric, then Francesca, then Jeffrey.
Right. Well, my first role in the federal government was not my current role. I started working at the Department of Defense, specifically in the Defense Security Cooperation University. It's a soft power sort of school that helps train both domestic security specialists and our allies as well. And I actually found it was not a job as a Fed, as we like to say in the federal government, as somebody who is a direct hire paid directly by the federal government. I actually started as a contractor. And there are a lot more positions as contractors in the federal government than many people might expect or be aware of. I found the USA Jobs application process to be a little overwhelming and intimidating because it's just so much different than most other application processes. But I was lucky enough to have had a security clearance from a previous internship as an undergrad at the State Department. So it made it easier to apply for jobs in general in the federal government. So I got scooped up real quick once I applied for that position, also as in communications and outreach. And everything else started from there. Once you get your foot in the door, and cannot emphasize enough, a security clearance is extremely valuable. That was really my ticket in. And now, years later, I'm here at USAID, and my federal career is well underway.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Francesca?
Hi, so I think I started applying for jobs in my last year of the MPA program, and I really appreciate all the help from Career Services at Baruch. I applied to positions across the board through USA Jobs. One of the opportunities was the recent graduate programs where I got interviews from a few different agencies, and then I took a position with NIH as a HR specialist, and it's been great. I also NIH is part of HHS, so I've had the opportunity to also do detail, which is sort of like a short-term career opportunity experience. So I was able to go down to the border during 2021 during the unaccompanied minors and help direct staff there. So that's sort of how I end up in my current role.
Great. Thank you. Jeffrey?
Hi, so I'll speak on my previous role at the Department of Transportation. I was a judicial clerk intern there, and I remember, I would say this time last year, I was diligently searching for opportunities, internship opportunities, and I would say that Career Services at Baruch definitely helped me a lot. I came across the Future Leaders in Public Service program. I submitted my application, so it was a bit of an unconventional route to the federal government. But I remember it being quite the process. I definitely had to craft my personal statements and resumes accordingly. And it was definitely a timely process as well. So I definitely recommend others here to keep in touch and contact with their career services at their respective schools. There are other pathways programs into the federal government that don't necessarily require a direct hire through the agencies themselves.
Great. Thank you, Jeffrey. And before Sam moves forward with our next panelist question, just as a quick note for our attendees here, we'll go into more detail later, but the Future Leader in Public Service program, the summer internship, actually has a late November deadline for this upcoming summer. So if you're interested, that's something I would encourage you to look into this fall before we get too close to the holidays. So that was just a quick added note there, but go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it definitely speaks to the longevity of like how long this process can take. So the next question is, when you were, applying to these federal roles, but were you also applying to opportunities outside of federal government? And if so, were you holding different expectations during your job search? And let's work backwards from here. So Jeffrey, let's start with you in the Future Leaders in Public Service program.
Sure. So prior to submitting my application, I definitely held a different standard and a different view on the application process, being that it's federal government. I viewed it as more bureaucratic and sort of that nature. I'm currently in Pan American Development Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that works in international development. And I would say that the application process for this internship was less robust. And the one for Future Leaders in Public Service program for Department of Transportation was definitely more robust and more complex. I had to gather references, and pretty much it was a much more timely process. And in related to my current position, I will say that the application process definitely requires more effort and help from career services, perhaps like how I had at Baruch.
Francesca.
Hi. So, sorry, there's a lawnmower outside. So I applied to jobs across the board, nonprofits, think tanks, contractors, federal government. I actually did get an offer from a contractor for a role at Department of Education. What I do like about being in competitive service at NIH now is right now, I'm sort of on pause in my career because I'm a new parent, but there's so much opportunity to easily switch jobs once you're in federal service.
Great. And Eric.
I would say, especially when you deal with USA jobs, the processes are very different, and right down to the resume, which I will throw out there. Don't even think of it as a resume. Think of it as a CV, because they want to see everything. Many advisors or just people in general think that the one page is good. You want to spare people from having to read too much. Don't do that for your USA jobs applications. They want to see absolutely everything, different format, different references. So the actual application process is different, aside from the fact that it's the government and they have, a lot more bureaucracy and security clearances and whatnot. So just treat them as two completely different processes, because that's what they are, the private and federal application processes. That would be what I would have to say.
Yeah, that's a great point, Eric. We will touch on that a little bit later as well. But yeah, even I know when we were kind of learning about that process, what job seekers are going through, that was a whole new way of thinking about like how to build a federal resume. So I really do actually appreciate that comparison to a CV. Yeah, that was great. Ryan, I'll let you ask the next.
Yeah, the CV analogy is great. Whenever I work with students in academia that are trying to pivot into the careers, I'm like, oh, that CV is so long, but it actually would translate well to the federal context. So what I wanted to do here is to dive into some individual questions for our panelists that are more closely aligned with their personal experiences and their expertise so far. So we're going to go Jeffrey, Eric, then Francesca, and I'm going to ask you specific questions. And if you need me to repeat any part of it, let me know. So Jeffrey, since you've gone through the Future Leaders in Public Service program, is there anything that you are thinking about, kind of either replicating or carrying forward from that past application process to future opportunities? I know you mentioned you're already in a separate internship program. When you think about post-graduation, is there anything from entering the FLIPS program that will be helpful for you as you think about your next steps in terms of career exploration?
Sure. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm currently an active job seeker. I'm in my current internship at the moment, but I'm always searching for new opportunities as they come. And something I can take out of my experience during the application process for the FLIPS program was pretty much utilizing my backgrounds. As a paralegal, I come from the private sector, so you would think that pretty much the sectors aren't related, public to private sector, but in reality, a lot of the skills that I acquired in the private sector were translatable to my position at the Department of Transportation. So I wouldn't exclude or self-select myself out of certain opportunities because I think that I may not be, well, my background doesn't align necessarily with the description. But as a matter of fact, it did actually, and I recommended people to don't really have that approach when approaching these applications.
Interesting, right? So the idea of not self-selecting out, that's something we'll talk about later on too, in terms of scales of roles and maybe expected experiences. There might be some creative ways of articulating how your skills align. So that's a great point. Thank you for that, Jeffrey. Eric, as someone who has worked at this point, several different kind of federal contexts, came in from different routes, are there parts of the application that change when you're already working within the federal government? And Francesca, you alluded to this too, but once you're in there, tell us a little bit about what it's like, either in that fluidity or between roles.
So for added context, I also had a contracting position at the Department of Health and Human Services. So I've kind of hopped around, and it's easier to do that once you're in the federal government. Contracting in particular, you can be extremely mobile once you have a security clearance, because these are private companies. And even though they still have federal limitations, they don't have to deal as much with the bureaucracy of USA jobs. That being said, when you are a Fed, it's much easier even within USA jobs to hop around as well. There are many positions, as I'm sure some of you might have noticed, that are only open to people who are in or have been in the federal government. And there are often even positions where the window of applications are very small. And sometimes that's because they have to do that legally, but they actually have an internal candidate that they specifically had in mind to fill the position. Because again, when you're in there, you can talk with everybody, you're networking. The door is wide open, or at least much more open when you're already in there. So I guess going off of this question, my biggest piece of advice is you don't have to get your dream job. Get a job that you think you can grow from, because you have a very good chance of doing that once you already have your foot in the door, whether it's security clearance or any other kind of position in and around the federal government.
That's an interesting point you add there, Eric, because I have come from a background of advising graduate business students, not necessarily public affairs students. And that was a similar advice we'd give to folks that were trying to enter into new work domains or new companies, is maybe get a role that you are really, really closely aligned to right now with future goals in mind, and that kind of, either lateral movement or change between organizations. So I'm glad to hear that that kind of advice is applicable in a lot of different contexts. So Francesca, I do have a follow-up question for you specifically, but if you have any notes about kind of interagency or within the Fed kind of movement, we could add that before we move on to our next question.
Yes, and I would also like to respond to the small opening period. So you go into USA Jobs, you'll see a job open anywhere, I think, from 5 days to constantly open. So sometimes they do have an internal candidate in mind. When that happens, they tend to advertise just to the federal government, but sometimes they don't. And they still open the announcement for 5 days. And the question is, why? Because we have to. It's NIH policy. Unless we're hiring nurses, which we always need nurses, which I think that's like year round. It's just agency policy that we post for 5 days. If we're not getting who we're looking for, we might extend, but it's always a 5-day posting. And sometimes it's a short period of time, especially with these remote jobs. We once advertised for a management analyst that was remote, and I think the first day got 400 applications. And we actually read every single application. We don't use AI. The AI is me. So having to review 400 resumes, it's a lot, especially when there's only so many openings. So that is another reason why we might, if something we think is going to be very popular, we might set it to close after the 75th applicant, just so we're not dealing with 1,000 resumes, because it gives hope to the applicants and it's just a lot of work for us. But yes, Ryan, with your question that you wanted to ask.
Sure. So from here, and this, you already are leading right into it. So as an HR professional within the context you're in right now with NIH, you've been on both sides of the cycle, both as an applicant and as a reviewer of these materials. Is there any advice you'd give to your past self or our student attendees on this call about things to highlight, maybe in like the CV nature of our federal resume? Are there things that you've seen generally be more successful for applicants, or things that people should avoid doing?
Well, I would say first is with every USA jobs announcement, at the bottom, there's a contact. Call them. Every agency is different. Sometimes you get a voicemail. If you get me and my workday is not too crazy, I'll spend a half hour, an hour on the phone with you with free career counseling. I mean, this is your taxpayer dollars at work. Every US citizen has an equal right to have the opportunity for one of these jobs. So I'm more than happy to spend time talking to people. I would say with USA jobs, it's very technical. So you really want to read through the entire announcement. And one of the main things is there will be what we call a specialized experience statement on every announcement, and it looks like a run-on sentence, and basically describes the type of experience that they want to see in resumes in order to pass that resume on to the hiring manager. I might love a candidate, but if I don't see the specialized experience in the resume, I can't pass it on to the hiring manager, no matter how much I like the candidate. My imagination only goes so far. So I think it's very clear that you realize that there are multiple people looking over your application, the hiring manager who really knows the position. But before that, the HR specialist, which I'm a generalist. So social science positions, I'm great with. I get it. Accountants, not so much. So you want to be very clear in the first part of your resume so that the HR specialist can easily see, yes, you meet the specialized experience, and this is how you meet the specialized experience.
Thank you. All right, that was our individual questions. I'll pass over to Sam.
Yeah, I'm actually going to put in another question up to all of you before I get to the question I was supposed to ask. All three of you have brought up experience with security clearances, and I'm wondering if you can just briefly go over what you experienced in your security clearances for your roles, just so that our audience knows kind of what to expect, at least, you know, again, like from the applicant side. And anyone can go first here.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I personally, even with having a previous experience, like having a security clearance, it makes it so there's less time, because depending on the clearance that you have is the time period you have to have it renewed. And if you never had one before, they do your entire life. So if you already have one and it lapses, even still, the authorities who are doing it only have to do it since the last time. We have, in my office, we have interns, and they also have to get security clearances. So Fatuma, I will say, getting an internship that gives you security clearance is also a way if you can't just walk right into a job that will give you one. But it's honestly taken a long time, and we lost half of a semester of an intern working with us because of the security clearance process taking a long time. So patience is really important when dealing with this. It can be very frustrating, but that's just the way of the world. And there's a pretty big backup, at least at the moment, that the government is trying to get through of security clearances.
Yeah, I want to add on at Eric's point there that it can be quite frustrating. It's definitely a lengthy process. And in my internship cohort at the Department of Transportation, I've actually, I know several fellow interns that couldn't make their way down to DC because their security clearance wasn't fully cleared. So they had to work remotely for a portion of their internship. So it's definitely a frustrating process, and patience is key when it comes to the security process in general.
And I would add at HHS, working at NIH, I don't really work with top secret security clearances. Most of the positions that I work with hiring are either a tier 1, tier 2. My security clearance at NIH took about 6 weeks, and basically anyone who comes to NIH, even if they're coming from NSA or CIA, they still have to go through our security clearance. I think where a top secret or secret security clearance is really helpful is if you want to go the contractor route and then eventually try to get into the federal government that way, it's great because then the contracting company doesn't have to do as much work. But in terms of HHS, we still have to clear you.
Great. Thank you so much. I know that, yeah, that was becoming, I saw a couple in the chat and I was like, yeah, let's just talk about the security clearance because it is a frustrating process. So thank you for providing your insight on it. But to the question I do want to ask is there any advice you would give yourself to when you were in the height of your job search? I'll start with Jeffrey.
Yeah. So as a current intern, I'm actively in the job market, well, in the job search at all times. Um, but a piece of advice I'll give to myself for future opportunities is to stay open. So career paths that I perhaps didn't consider in the past. Um, I've been told this several times during my time at the Department of Transportation, to always keep an open mind and be receptive to opportunities that don't necessarily align with what you're looking for at the moment, but you never know where that can lead you, honestly. Yeah, that's a crucial piece of advice that stuck with me during my time at the Department of Transportation.
Francesca, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. No, I would say that I applied across the board. But I think recent graduates probably would have saved me the most time because those were the positions I applied to that I did get responses back. And then also it has changed since I was applying in 2019. But on USA jobs, they now have these assessments that some jobs require you take after applying. When I was applying, not many agencies were doing it, but it's become much more widespread to be mindful when you're taking the assessment. You know, I would work a full day in Manhattan, then go to class, come home, feed my cat, and then apply for jobs and take that assessment at 11 p.m. And now those scores from those assessments are stored in USA Jobs for 1 year. So if you do it when you're exhausted, it might, even if you apply to other jobs, they might still be taking those assessment scores to determine whether you qualify or not.
Great. And Eric?
I'm sure many of you can relate to this, but I, being an MPA student, was really hoping to walk right into a fancy policy job and dive right into working on the nitty-gritty. But that's not really how the government works. You have to put in your time for the most part at different agencies doing administrative or program related work or communications like I do, which is very generalist. And at first, I didn't want to do some of these kinds of things because I thought that I worked really hard. But you have to build those baseline skills before you can march right up because people in the government are very educated. At least I can say at USAID, we're very top heavy. People, for the most part, either start working uh, towards the bottom doing programmatic kind of work like that, or you go out into the world, have your PhD, become a subject matter expert, and then come back as a respected professional. So just slow your roll, set your expectations, and look at the long term because that's nothing in the federal government happens fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. And Ryan, I'll turn it over to you for a final question for the panel.
Right. So I know there have been some questions in the chat about specific experiences for some of our panelists. We'll see if we have time to address that later on in the full Q&A, but we'll get through some more questions here. We'll go into some career advising perspectives that hopefully will address some of those student submitted questions. And then again, at the end, we'll cover whatever else is possible. So for all of our panelists, and we'll go Francesca, Jeffrey, then Eric in terms of order. Are there any sort of myths about federal careers or the federal government that you'd like to debunk based on your experiences? Things that you're like, oh yeah, I definitely thought blank was going to happen, but now that I've been there for a couple of years, or now that I went through the FLIPS program or did anything else, is there anything you'd like to demystify for our students in terms of like those federal careers that you thought you had misconceptions going in about?
Well, I feel that I was pretty well advised through the process. I mean, going to Baruch, it's a great school with great career services. I also have family in civil service. I would say that to be mindful that every agency does things a little bit differently. And also some agencies are OPM exempt, which means they have a little bit more latitude to be more flexible in their hiring process. So, I would say with any agency, if you're interested in working there, call them. And if they don't pick up, call a different number or call at a different time and just see if you can talk to someone because a lot of people in government, they like talking about what they do and they like sharing and helping people get into federal service.
And I'll start off by debunking two myths that I actually experienced or heard of in the Department of Transportation. The first one would be that all government jobs federal government jobs are in DC, and that's untrue. I came to realize that after just attending events and webinars that, as a matter of fact, federal government jobs are pretty much spread out throughout the entire country in states, and it pretty much varies on what your interests are. So that's one. Another one is that federal government salaries aren't competitive, and that's simply untrue as well. They're in fact very competitive, and they've risen faster in recent years and are on par, I would say, with the private sector as well.
I know I keep saying the same things, but truly, there's more than one way to be in the federal government or to work for the federal government. Contracting is a great way in and also comes in different forms. I didn't know until I came to USAID that a strong majority of the people who work at USAID are not direct hires, whether they're civil servants or foreign service officers. And there are many different routes to join the civil service or the foreign service. So if for anybody who's thinking of becoming a foreign service officer, you don't have to study for it right now, pass it, take it a million times, and hope that you can get it while you're in school or just after you leave school. In fact, it might be better if you get more experience before joining the foreign service or the civil service, because there's more than one kind of person who they want to work there. So there's no one straight path. Please always remind yourself that, because I wish that I did.
All right, thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful. And actually, I feel like you all probably snuck into our slideshow because you have just made this part easier for us, and we're probably going to just zoom very much quicker into the Q&A. So please, everyone, give me help me giving a round of applause for the panelists so far, and we're going to return to them in the Q&A. So we're going to pull up the slideshow for a little bit just to kind of go over little tips and tricks that we recommend as career advisors when starting out your federal job search. We do know that there are questions building up in the chat. Anyone of Eric, Jeffrey, and Francesca, if you find that there are questions that you can reply to quickly, please go ahead and be our guest to do so as well. So I will just bring up my screen here. All right, and it looks like we're good to go. Okay, so very quickly on searching for federal opportunities, things that we recommend, and when creating a profile on USA Jobs. One, create a full, complete profile. Log in, give yourself like an hour or two to really build it out, especially for that federal resume. Currently, right now, the USA Jobs is functioning as a dual authentication website. So it's transitioning to a site called login.gov. So that is like a single sign-on for all different agencies, etc., USA Jobs, and more. We do recommend, taking the time to explore your search functions and preferences. So when Francesca brought this up, and so did Eric, was like talking about pathways for recent graduates. There's also filters for and pathways for people with disabilities, veterans, and etc. We also want to note that we are mainly talking about executive branch agencies today. There are other ways to get into the federal government through congressional opportunities and through the Presidential Management Fellows. We won't be talking about those today. We do recommend speaking with your respective career services offices to get more information on that. Last thing I'll mention here, because Ryan will go into this a little bit more, getting up to speed with general schedule ranks or GS ranks. When you get into the federal government, when we think of salary negotiation, sometimes, we do a lot of market research, et cetera, trying to go on Glassdoor and whatnot. For federal jobs, and even for most local and city and state, they have a general schedule, and that is actually a good way to kind of assess the step of where you're at. And that's a good way to that's a good scale to keep in mind when you're talking about salary negotiation. I'll hand it to you, Ryan.
Yes. So you've gotten into USA Jobs, you've created your profile, you started, putting in some features and playing around a little bit. Now what? The important thing is to get just a lay of the land and understanding some of the features. Again, I am by no means an expert in this. I'm not currently searching for federal roles myself. I'm pretty content with my role here at the University of Connecticut. However, there are a lot of things that you can carry some similarities from the USA Jobs functions to other job boards or other career development tools you might be familiar with. As we talked about, the federal resume is different than some of the other job search processes you might be familiar with. I am very much a component of a lot of our internship programs you're applying for. Students get your resume down to one page. But as Eric alluded to, this is much more closer to a curriculum vitae or a CV, if you will. List everything. If you're like, oh, I'm not sure if I should put this in there, when in doubt, put it in the federal resume. That could be a mixture of your past professional experiences, full-time or part-time, could be internships, could be academic experiences. There are a lot of different sections within that you have, as long as you're essentially either within character counts or it doesn't show you an error, put as much detail in there as possible. The good news is that it's not just one single resume as well. So say you wanted to apply to types of jobs, maybe things that are more fiscally focused or more policy focused or more communications focused, as an example, you can have multiple iterations of your federal resume within USA Jobs. So as opposed to having one single file that you're unsure if you tweaked anything about, or if you really want to focus on something and take a deeper dive into it, you have the ability to have a couple of different drafts and different file types within your USA Jobs profile. Again, if any of our panelists want to chime in and give their own suggestions, feel free to do so. What I would suggest is making sure that you put as much detail in there and try and use some of the language that increases your kind of searchability. If you think about search engine optimization, that kind of concept, there's that kind of practice within these functions as well. Use language that is similar to what's posted in the job descriptions. Think about ways that the work of the organization you're applying for, maybe how they use the language on their websites. Not plagiarizing, but gleaning some of that language, using some of the same vernacular, and that might increase your ability for either people doing manual reviews or any sort of automated processes to help you get kind of higher up in those ranks of searching. Understand, as we mentioned before, the eligibility of programs and different roles you're applying for. Some may only be for internal candidates. Some may be for those that are taking part in the Pathways program, which is for more recent graduates. Some might be open to the public. Those are all broken down by role. And you could look through each individual posting you're interested in and see kind of who can and who can't apply for those particular jobs. What I would also suggest is keeping your mind open and leveraging job series codes. There are a couple of different resources on GoGovernment, which we'll share later on as well. It's from the Partnership for Public Service. Essentially, it's almost like a Dewey Decimal System from the library, but for these specific roles within an organization. So there are ways to look into, maybe you want to do a similar type of job, but you're not sure what type of agency might have that type of job. You can use those search job series codes, in your search functions as well. So there's a variety of different ways to get in, a variety of different types of eligible roles you may or may not be applying for. But again, maybe you apply for one role, get into it, later down the road, apply to another one internally. There's a lot more fluidity there. We can go on to the next one, Sam. Right. So here are just a couple quick examples we wanted to share with you, pulled from USA Jobs. I did a search earlier this week and just say, all right, what are some examples? I know it's a little grainy on your side here, but you can, if you pull up USA Jobs, any function, you can look through these roles yourself as well. One, an environmental protection specialist, and one, an economist. If you look on the right-hand side of these screenshots, under that apply button, there's a quick overview that shows you general scales, shows you salary ranges, shows you other logistics, whether it's remote, where it may physically be. As was alluded to earlier by Jeffrey, the large majority of federal roles aren't in DC or in the DMV area. They're actually across the country. So depending on where you're joining us from, you might find a federal role in the major city nearby where your institution is. There might be a rural office. There could be a district office for a variety of different things. As an example, I'm up here in Hartford, Connecticut, and if I look and I squint my eyes and look over the corner there, I can see our regional HUD office. We have students who work for the Department of Labor over by the train station in Hartford that until this year, I didn't even know existed, right? So there are a lot of things that you can figure out where these roles are by looking at the details of the positions. And if you wanted to, instead of just going by position title or job code, you can even go geographically. If you know you want to go to a particular region and you want to go somewhere else, there's some functions that we can give you some more suggestions on as well.
Sal. All right, and finally, we'll be sharing these resources for the federal job search. So we've alluded to the Go Government webpage, which is student-facing resources by the Partnership of Public Service. They have a list of all the different job codes that USA Jobs uses. Like Jeffrey also alluded to, was kind of keeping your eye out for what else could you be applicable for. It doesn't just have to be administration. Where else could you be going to? And on the Go Government website, they have this quiz, but like BuzzFeed for federal, like which federal agency are you? I've taken the quiz, and it's if I were to end up in the federal government, I thought it would be DOE, but it was actually the Department of Veteran Affairs. So that was very interesting, and so that's a really good place. At least it was a good start to know, like, oh, I could end up in pretty much a variety of different agencies that I probably haven't even thought of at first. Ryan, what was your federal agency?
I was also the VA, but it was funny because my first role out of undergrad was actually working for a district House of Representatives office. And one of the pain points of my job was doing casework with the VA. So it's very funny that 10 years later, it's like, all right, you'd be a great fit to work in the VA. It's like, oh, interesting.
Great. That's awesome. All right. And so this is the last slide of the slideshow. I'm going to take it down. We're going to open it up to Q&A. Everyone will be getting a copy of the slideshow after today's session. So now we're going to open it up to Q&A. I'm pulling up the chat. If anyone here would like to raise their hand and, speak out for questions and whatnot, we'll be on the lookout for that as well. All right, Sydney, I see your hand.
Sorry, I'm literally getting ready for a stats exam, so I've kind of been on the move, but I was very excited to do this and listen in, so apologize for all the chaos. But one of my main questions was when you were talking about it, especially Eric, when you were going through your question, when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about the security clearance because I want to work in the federal government, and I am nervous because when I was in my undergrad, I'm in grad school right now, I lost my internships because of COVID, so I never got my security clearance. So my question to you is there a job, an internship that I could get that you would recommend that would allow me to get a security clearance? So when I go to apply for jobs, that is kind of out of my worries.
First of all, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Okay.
I can relate to COVID ruining things. I think we all can. I can't speak to internships across the entire federal government. I will talk to, say, for example, in my office and at USAID in general, we work very closely with minority serving institutions like historically Black colleges and universities and Hispanic serving institutions. We have a partnership with an organization called HACU, the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. And we have an internship partnership program with them where we bring interns on for a semester or a year. And that provides them with security clearances, and you get the opportunity to work with different offices throughout our agency. And I'm sure that there are similar programs across the federal government. And also, just for a little pitch here, you don't have to be Hispanic to be through this program. And I would very much look for external partnerships to find internships like that. It'll probably, not that there aren't internships in the federal government, but there are more opportunities out there than you might think. So try to find them through external resources and you might have better luck.
Okay, yeah, because that's what I've been looking at. I graduate. It's a quick program at the Maxwell. It's where I'm from. It's a 1-year intensive, so I finish in June. So I don't know if that's quick enough. Like if I started applying for now for a spring semester internship, but that would be a good question. So thank you for answering that. I appreciate it.
Great. All right, I had a question come in through the chat. There is someone who applied for a position for an agency, CMS, in August. They just got an email from USA Jobs that their application has been moved to the hiring manager. So congratulations. I'll start with Francesca. What should this person expect to do if they get the interview? any kind of timeline to like further communications, et cetera, knowing that, this things do vary by agency.
Yes, so things vary by agency. So if this is CMS is under the HHS umbrella. So I would say, congratulations, you have made what we call a certificate, which means the HR specialist has gone over all the applicants to an announcement and produced a list of candidates that meet the criteria for the job and that the hiring manager could legally hire, because we do everything at as per US legislation and OPM and such. So what that means is the hiring manager has your resume, but what that also means is that throughout HHS, we share certificates. So let's say one of my areas wants a communication specialist. Before I go out with the announcement, I will look at shared certificates and see if there was a previous announcement that was a similar job and a good candidate for my area. And then I would share it with the hiring manager. So it means you might hear from the hiring manager of who received the initial certificate. It also means you might hear from a different hiring manager, either at CMS or throughout HHS, depending on what you put in terms of location and such. For example, if you say the job was in New York, you only want to be in New York, and I'm looking to hire in DC, I wouldn't use that certificate. So in terms of timeline, certificates, I think, expire after 6 months. So yeah, I would still continue to apply, because the more hiring managers see your name, the more likely you are to get that interview. But yeah, I would say open to receive a response either next day or within 6 months, if they're interested in you.
Any other questions coming in?
Let me see here. I didn't get any direct questions yet, but I know there was a couple that were in the overall chat that I wanted to speak to. I know that some of our either fellow career advisees had actually, before we get to that, I know Desaya Cates here has a hand raised and asked some questions before. So Desaya, go ahead.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. I just wanted to kind of piggyback on something Francesca was talking about in terms of timelines. So can you speak to the direct hire and pathways selection process in terms of timeline? Like, I'll see some things that are like, we are really urgently hiring. And so I don't know, if that is on a different schedule than like what people have typically shared about their hiring experience within certain agencies or not.
Yeah, it really depends with timelines. I would say if they are hiring pathways, they typically have pathways, I think, on the cohort schedule, in that the agency puts out an announcement, and then all the areas in the agencies that want a pathways or recent graduates sort of look over a certificate. And I think you could probably expect to hear back sooner, because there's a timeline, and they wouldn't necessarily share those certificates because it's a very specific role. But I would give a long timeline for really everything. I would say recent graduate, about 2 to 3 months, depending on the agency.
Thank you for that. Let me just double check some other questions that may have come in. Again, feel free to use the chat feature for our attendees. Let's see here. This is a good one. I think can apply to a lot of folks. So, and this I want to ask our panelists though. Other than just the career development staff you might have worked with at your home institutions when you were looking into these roles, were there any sort of resources you also use to get another set of eyes? When I work with my students, I always tell them the advice I give them is based on my identities, my experiences, who I am, what's worked for me, what's not, who the partners we've been working with. But a lot of the stuff I do is direct local internship programs. So were there any sort of resources outside of your institutions that you pursued on your career development journey, whether other people looking at your application materials, or like Francesca, you mentioned calling the staff? Was there any other resources you used as you're putting together your materials?
I can speak on this. For me, at least, I think like LinkedIn is a huge resource. For me, at least, it was. That's actually how I came up, apart from my career services at Baruch. That's also how I came across the FLIPS program. So it's definitely an important resource that can help you expand your possibilities and research other opportunities that you otherwise would really get access to.
Eric or Francesca, if you have anything else to add, feel free. And if not, we can go to another question too. All right. Well, we'll get back to that if necessary. We see Sydney has a question. So Sydney, go ahead.
Yeah, I have another question. So you mentioned LinkedIn. How I know federal governments are different with private, where reaching out is a little bit harder and they don't have as much say in an application process. But if I'm applying for a federal job, how likely is it if I reach out to someone who has a position in the federal government and could help me get my application through, or if they have any impact or say on my application?
So in my case, having interned at the Department of Transportation, I've met a lot of people that are very receptive to helping others. And I think generally, people in professionals of government want to help others pretty much get into government as well. And if you happen to pretty much like build your network with federal employees, reaching out doesn't hurt. People definitely want to help others. And from my own personal experience, that certainly has been the case.
Great, thank you.
I want to piggyback on that in that depending on the agency you're looking at, the apparatus for hiring could be very different. So like, for example, at USAID, our Human Capital and Talent Management office, we call HCTM, it's changed and taken different forms depending on administration and anything happening at that time. So I would be aware when you're trying to network or look for help that you're probably going to have to bounce around to different places or different people. And that's just the nature of the federal government. It's at the end of the day, an arm of the American people, or at least that's what it's supposed to be. And the decisions and the opinions of the American people change just like the administrations do. So what an agency looks like on one day might be different than it looks like from another day. So just, don't be discouraged if you find yourself going down the wrong direction or a different one. You just, pivot. And my piece of advice there would be try to figure out the layout of the agency before you start networking with the people. So that like map it out, because you're jumping down a rabbit hole sometimes.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and also don't be afraid to ask really basic questions, because every agency is different. Policy is always changing. During COVID, I would say, you don't like the policy, fine, wait 2 weeks. It'll change. Let's see what you think then. But yes, there's a huge diversity in the US federal government, and a lot of people are happy to talk and to help however they can. So please do feel free to reach out.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it.
On a related note, a quick follow-up, things that are relevant here. We have somebody who wanted to ask about career transitions, but before we get to that, two quick ones. In terms of people that may have lost clearance or their clearance, security clearance may have lapsed, can you just clarify what you need to do to reapply for that? That's one question. And then the second is, again, if maybe this is more of Francesca, but do agencies provide relocation funding in any context, or does it really depend on the agency or the applicant? So security clearance lapsing, and then also relocation expenses, if those are relevant to your experiences.
I'll speak to the first part. You do not have a direct role in your security clearance. It seems strange, but you need to be sponsored by either the contracting company or the agency that you'll be working at. So you kind of just have to find a spot first, and then your clearance will follow, as opposed to doing your homework and making sure it's up to date. You don't have that much control over it, unfortunately. I can't speak to the second one.
Yeah, and I'll talk about relocation. So there's a great way to see whether relocation is covered or not. You go on USA Staffing. If you read through the whole announcement, there are things called, I think it's appointment benefits or or some sort of incentives, it will say whether the agency will cover relocation. I would say in HHS, that's pretty rare. I also interviewed through one of the intelligence agencies, and they did offer relocation for something that was at my level for, just graduate MPA program, had some work experience. But I would say within the other agencies, I think that's a little bit more rare, but you can, it was required is for agencies to be clear about it. So just look at the announcement and there'll be a box like check yes or no of whether it would be covered.
Oh, that's great to know. And it's like right there. I think this might be the last question for now, but we'll absolutely follow up with opportunities to connect with the panelists. Whether it was you specifically or someone that you know in your network that was a career changer, do you have any advice for those who might be trying to pivot into federal government? Again, whether it was you or someone you know in your network.
I mean, I could give some advice insofar as for me, going to graduate school was a shift for me. I was, I think, about 30 when I began the MPA program and was a career change. I would say that for every position that they advertise, you should look at what the full performance level is, the promotion potential, because you might be starting off at a lower GS level than what you would like. Like I used to go to career services and say, I would only start a job at I think back then I was like, I need to make 70K a year. And I did start lower in the federal government, but with the career ladder, I had a path to be promoted after a year to the next GS level. So I think it's important that when you look at GS levels, not just to look at dollar amounts, but to also see what the roadmap is for that position, because the recent graduate position I was appointed on started at the GS9, but has a full performance level of a 13, which means I don't have to go back and recompete to get the 13, that I could be at the discretion of my supervisor.
Great, thank you. Eric or Jeffrey, do you have anything else to add to that?
Sure. A piece of advice that's worked for me is that don't let your background discourage you. I come from the private sector, so I came with the notion that my prior skill set and background wasn't really relevant to the public sector, but that's completely false. I definitely leveraged it in a way and tailored my resumes and cover letters accordingly to the job description, making sure that my past experiences are relevant to the position advertised. And that's pretty much a piece of advice that's stuck with me since, and I'll definitely use going forward.
Yeah, I've heard advice from other people. That's true. Don't disqualify yourself. Let other people, let the people looking at your application do that. The federal government has a billion different things that they're looking for, and as I said, with the jobs that you start with to try to work your way up the ladder, those are generally broader skills than more specialized ones that you usually have to work your way up to. So people change their careers, or at least their focuses in the federal government all of the time, and it shouldn't discourage you if you don't, I don't know, if you want to work at USA and you don't have foreign policy experience, for example.
Well, thank you so much. And that pretty much concludes our hour. It was very jam-packed. Please, everyone, help me thank our fellow panelists, my fellow co-host here. We hope to see you at future events of this NASPAA DC track, and we'll be following up shortly with the recording, the presentation, and ways to connect with our panelists after. Thank you so much all for joining us, and have a great rest of your week.